Thanksgiving is right around the corner, and it's around this time of year that many preachers do sermons about the importance of being thankful and how we can be thankful and reflecting on the blessings of our life and similar topics like that. And I've done many sermons like that in the past, but not today. Today is not a sermon about thankfulness. Rather, this sermon is about what we all know is the most important aspect of Thanksgiving, which is the food. Sitting down to the feast and enjoying the banquet that has been prepared. And although that is kind of a silly over-exaggeration, I do want to talk about, Thanksgiving from more of the banquet aspect of it. Because I was thinking of in Scripture how many times the illustration of a banquet is used. And I thought it would be fun this year, instead of talking about the thankfulness aspect of Thanksgiving, if we instead looked at a portion of Scripture that talks about a kingdom banquet, and using that as kind of a template for the attitude that we should have when we approach Thanksgiving. So let's jump in to our passage of Scripture today, which is Matthew chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. And Jesus is speaking at this time, and it's really interesting because the parable that Jesus tells in this passage is a response to the Pharisees, but it's not a response to anything that the Pharisees have said or a question that they've asked Jesus. Instead, it says in Scripture just before this chapter that the Pharisees were trying to figure out a way to arrest Jesus. And right after we have that passage, the Pharisees were looking to arrest Jesus. We then go into Matthew 22, where Jesus tells this parable about the kingdom of heaven being like a wedding banquet. And so that's kind of the backdrop for this parable that Jesus is going to tell, which I think is rather interesting. It's not really too important. It's just kind of an interesting thing to note. But let's read into this and read what Jesus says here and the analogy he uses of this wedding banquet. So again, Matthew chapter 22, beginning at verse 1. Says, Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. Then he sent some more servants and said, 'Tell those who have been invited that I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fattened calf have been butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they paid no attention and went off, one to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. Go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you find.' So the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, both good and bad, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. 'Friend,' he asked, 'how did you get in here without wedding clothes?' The man was speechless. Then the king told the attendants, 'Tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen.'" Now you might be looking at a passage like that and wonder, well, what can we apply to our Thanksgiving dinners from a passage like that? And there really are things in this passage that we can apply. And especially when this is talking about this banquet being an illustration for the kingdom of heaven. And we as followers of Christ, we want to, as we do the work of God's kingdom, we should be bringing a little piece of God's kingdom into everything that we do. So if this illustration, this parable, is meant to illustrate what the kingdom of heaven is like, then there are ways that we can bring little pieces of it into our day-to-day world, and especially during this Thanksgiving time when we have a banquet. So I want us to look at some of the things that happens in this story that Jesus tells. First of all, after the first people who were invited to the banquet ended up not going to the banquet, look at what the king's instructions were. The king sent his servants out into the streets to invite anyone and everyone. And I really like what it says in verse 10 that says they gathered all the people they could find, both good and bad. Everyone was invited to this banquet. And of course, in the kingdom of heaven, that means that everyone is invited into salvation, into being reunited with God through the sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross. Everyone is invited into that. And this is something that we can also apply when it comes to our Thanksgiving meals, is that we should have a Thanksgiving meal. If we want it to look like a kingdom banquet, it should be a meal that invites everyone. That everyone, anyone and everyone, both good and bad, is welcome to have a seat at our table. And that's not always the attitude we go into Thanksgiving with, I think. I think sometimes we view it more as a country club meal rather than a food bank meal, where we think of it as, this Thanksgiving time is a very special time and it's almost a sacred time. And so we don't want anybody there that's going to cause a problem. We just want the people there that are nice and good and easy to get along with. And we're going to sit down and have this very special moment with highly sophisticated people and people that think like us. And we kind of view it sometimes as a country club type meal, when really it should be viewed more as a food bank type meal, where there is no requirement to get in. There is no price you have to pay to have a seat there. Anyone and everyone is welcome to the table. I remember when I was in college, several states away from my family, the first Thanksgiving I had was far less than glamorous. I forgot to get some groceries beforehand, and so I'm Skyping with the rest of my family. They're on video call, and everybody can see me, and I'm watching them eat this elaborate feast, just all the great food I wished I could be having, and I'm sitting in my dorm room in front of my computer eating a can of Spam, which is a far cry from a Thanksgiving meal. And I remember the next year was so different because there was somebody on my dorm room floor that invited me to come to their house for Thanksgiving. And I remember that was such a special moment to have that invitation, being there away from my family, but still have an invitation to join someone else's family and have a seat at their table and share in the meal with them. And that was a very meaningful moment to me, especially with how not extraordinary the last Thanksgiving I had there was. It was very meaningful to me. And I'm so thankful that I was invited to join in that meal with them. But I forgot about that feeling. I forgot about it because several years later, just this last year, we were having our Thanksgiving, and my wife, being the wonderfully generous and caring person that she is, invited someone to share in our Thanksgiving meal with us. And I remember when she was first talking to me about that, about wanting to invite this person, invite her friend, and I think it was a friend that I hadn't even met. Like maybe I'd met them once, but I don't think I'd met them at all. And I remember when she was first talking to me about inviting her friend to my family's Thanksgiving, my first reaction was not a pleasant one. It wasn't an outward reaction. It was just an inward reaction of feeling like, well, I don't want this person I don't know very well to come to my family Thanksgiving because it's my family. I've been looking forward to spending time with my family, and I want it to just be my family. I don't want this other person, this outsider, to come in. And then I was reminded of that time when I was in college and was invited to someone else's Thanksgiving and how meaningful that was for me at that time. And it really convicted me a bit that even though I had enjoyed being invited to someone else's Thanksgiving meal, that I was so quick when I was back with my family to have that initial reaction of, no, you can't come to this. This is too special. And we have to be careful that we don't take that approach when it comes to Thanksgiving, that we don't look at it as, oh, this is a family-only event, or this is some kind of event that is too sacred to have outsiders be a part of. That's not what a kingdom banquet looks like. A kingdom banquet invites anyone and everyone to be a part of the celebration. And that's an approach that we should take. That's what the king did in this story. He sent his servants out to invite everyone on the streets, both good and bad. And the wedding hall was filled with guests. It's not an exclusive club. It's an open banquet that invites everyone. So there's one thing that we can take from that story. Let's look at another thing that we can take from this story. We see that this banquet that the king puts on is not just a banquet for the fun of it. It's not a banquet that's put on just because the king feels like having a good time and he just wants to have a lot of people there. But the king puts on this banquet to celebrate his son being married. And that's why he's inviting all these people to come and share in the feast, because he wants to celebrate his son and what his son is going through, this wonderful time of his life. It's not just a banquet for the fun of it. It's a banquet that has meaning. And that's something that we see in a kingdom banquet, is that it has meaning. It's something that is done for a purpose. And again, that doesn't mean that it's too sacred to invite outsiders in, because the king did invite everyone to be a part of that celebration. But it wasn't just the food, right? It's not just about eating until you get full and then eating some more and then getting the dessert afterwards and sitting for a little bit and then getting a second piece of pie once you have enough room, right? It's not just about the food. It's more than that. It's about what you are gathering to celebrate. There's a deeper meaning behind the banquet. And the same thing applies with Thanksgiving, that it is that time. Thanksgiving is that time for us to be thankful, to reflect on all of the blessings that we do have. And we have to make sure, I know I joked about, everybody talking about that aspect of Thanksgiving around this time. But that is still something that we don't want to lose. We want that to be a part of our Thanksgiving meals, that we are reflecting on the blessings that God has given us and being content with what we have, realizing that there is a deeper meaning. It's not just about the food. It's not even just about the family. It's about being thankful. And as I think about that deeper meaning and gathering together to have that remembrance and have that reflection, I'm reminded of how altars were used in the Bible. Because altars were used in two different kinds of ways. The first way was that they were used for animal sacrifices to pay the penance for their sins, right? But there was a second way that altars were used, which was that they were built to remind people of something that had been done in the past. And so when people would walk by and see the altar, that they could remember, oh yeah, that altar was built when this wonderful thing happened. And then they used that to pass the story on to their children, who their children would see the altar and ask, well, what's that altar there for? And it would provide the opportunity for their parents to tell them the story. Well, that altar was built in remembrance of this wonderful thing that has happened. And the same thing should be happening with Thanksgiving. Not that we should be stacking a bunch of stones on top of each other, but that we should be using that time as a reminder to reflect on all that we've been given and all that we have, and to take some time to stop wanting things we don't have and be thankful for what we do have. And that's something that my family has always done at Thanksgiving time, where normally before we eat, we all go around, and I'm sure many of your families do this as well, but maybe they don't. But it's something that, as a kid, I always kind of rolled my eyes at, and oh boy, here we go again, sitting down, and before we can eat the food, we all have to talk about something we're thankful for. But as I've grown older, I've come to appreciate it more and more, to the point where I almost look forward to it more than the food. Just having that opportunity to share what I'm thankful for and hear from my family and friends what they're thankful for. And it truly is a wonderful time. And we want to make sure that we don't lose that aspect of Thanksgiving, that we don't lose that time of being thankful. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. You can have everybody go around and say what they're thankful for. You could turn it into a game and give everybody a piece of paper, and they have to, write something down from A through Z of things they're thankful for. Or maybe they've got to try to write down 5 things that they don't think anybody else has, and then go around and compare answers. And whoever had the most unique answers gets a special prize. Or there's ways you can do it to kind of break up the monotony of it. So the method isn't really what matters with that, but just the principle of going through that process and realizing that there is a deeper meaning, and should be a deeper meaning to the meal if we want it to reflect a kingdom banquet. And so that we want to make sure that we do that during Thanksgiving, that we do utilize that opportunity to reflect on our on the blessings that God has given to us. And that's something we see here. This wedding in Matthew 22 was not done just for the fun of it. It was done with deeper meaning, to celebrate the Son being married. So what else can we learn from this passage? Well, let's go ahead and start addressing the less pleasant parts of this parable about those who had been invited in the first place, who, when the servants went out to them, they captured the servants and killed them and refused to go to the wedding banquet. And even afterwards, the man who was invited offered the street to come in, but showed up without wearing the wedding garments, which was a sign of disrespect for the king and the banquet itself. And he was thrown out because he didn't have the wedding banquet. So we have 2 different groups of people, but the same problem, where both the people who were invited first and the man who was thrown out at the end of the story both missed out on the banquet because they did not honor it. They dishonored the banquet, and because they dishonored it, they missed it. And this is another aspect of a kingdom banquet that we should be aware of, is that a kingdom banquet can be lost. You can lose that aspect of a kingdom banquet, a banquet that has meaning, a banquet that is open to anyone and everyone, both good and bad. And it's important that we don't just go through the motions in times like this. That with our Thanksgiving meal, we don't just go through the motions. It's not just making the food and eating the food, and it's even more than just recognizing the meaning behind the banquet, that we are there to be thankful. It even goes beyond that, of being respectful during that time, right? That you're not rolling your eyes at everybody talking about what they're thankful for. It's not getting into arguments with the people that are there, but respecting both that time and the people that are there, so that you don't lose that opportunity, because it can be lost. I think of it kind of like marriage. There's that phrase that you shouldn't stop dating your spouse after you get married, meaning that once you're married, it's not just like, oh, well, we arrived, we made it, we passed the goal, so we don't have to put any effort into our relationship anymore because we're married, right? That is a terrible approach to marriage. You want to make sure that you are still investing in that relationship in the midst of marriage. That's not the end, right? That's the beginning of a new chapter. And what happens when people don't do that? When people are not respectful in the marriage, when people are not honoring their spouse in their marriage, oftentimes they lose what they have. When we dishonor what we've been given, when we don't respect it, we can oftentimes lose it. And I think as the years go on, we see that applying to Thanksgiving as well, of people that dread going to Thanksgiving because they don't want to see their family, or they don't want to get into a political argument, or maybe they go into it with the plan to get into a political argument and a plan to point out the faults of their family members. And eventually, no one looks forward to going to Thanksgiving anymore because of how disrespectful everyone is to each other at that time. Even though they know it's a time to, come together as family and share what you're thankful for, but just because of the disrespect and the hatred and the rudeness, they no longer look forward to it, and it slowly breaks apart. There were people that missed out on the wedding banquet because they dishonored it. They were not respectful. They didn't accept the king's invitation, or they showed up not wearing the wedding clothes. They were just there for the food. They didn't care about all that other stuff, and they were thrown out. It's not enough to just go through the motions. And it's not enough to even know why you are doing what you're doing, and to keep that aspect of thankfulness in it. But we also have to remain respectful in that process. Respectful of both the meaning of the event and respectful of the people that are there. And I think that if we can do that and do all of these things, inviting people outside of our family to be a part of it and share in that feast with us, remembering that it has a deeper meaning beyond just eating the food, and that we remain respectful of that time and the people that we share that time with. If we can do those things, it will be reflective of God's kingdom. It's possible. And I think we can see it in this passage. Our Thanksgiving celebration can imitate a kingdom banquet when we approach it hospitably, meaningfully, and respectfully. So with all of that in mind, I hope that all of you out there who are listening to this have a wonderful Thanksgiving. That you enjoy getting together with family and friends. That you take that time, really utilize that opportunity to be thankful for all that you have, and inviting people you know to share in that with you. And that all of us would be respectful of that time and the people we share that time with, in honor of God's kingdom. So I pray that you will have a kingdom banquet for Thanksgiving this Thursday. It'll be a wonderful time, and that God will bless it, and that God will bless you. I don't know that you would have any questions, but maybe if you have a comment about anything I've talked about, you can always contact me through the Facebook page, Sermon in the Pocket, or email me at sermoninthepocket@gmail.com. And if you want to support the cost of this show, the best way to do that is to pledge a support on Patreon. And as always, I encourage you to share this with family and friends, especially during this Thanksgiving time. Because honestly, it would be kind of weird if you shared it at another time. If it was the middle of July and you're like, hey, listen to this message about a kingdom banquet and reflecting that in our Thanksgiving meal, it wouldn't fit very well. So if you want to share it with family and friends, best to do it before Thanksgiving. But yeah, I hope this has been meaningful, and I pray that God was able to speak to you through it, and I pray that God will continue to bless you as you go throughout your week. Thank you for listening.